I enjoyed this one. I was at the other augmented reality event, the first one as well. And, and that one was more exciting than this one because it was the first one, but this one I thought was more constructive.
Well, I go to a fair number of conferences, and one thing that impressed me very strongly here was to see such a high density of very smart people who were working so very hard, and it gave me kind of a snapshot of where things are right now. And I'm really very pleased to be invited, and I really like being a science fiction writer, but let me tell you, the science fiction writers are not the people who do it. And the people who do it, the people who invent the business models, I think are something really under the sun, new under the sun in the last 100 years or so, and it's really remarkable to see them at work.
Yeah, people often ask us, science fiction writers, where we get our ideas, and frankly, we steal them. We take it from people out in the real world and twist them and amplify them. H.G. Wells said you should triple everything as a science fiction writer. I'm sure Vernor's aware of that dictum. If you double it, people just think you're exaggerating it, and if you quadruple it, they don't know what the hell you're talking about. So tripling it is just about perfect, really. I've been around AR enough now that I'm starting to understand, the groups and the people and the companies and the entrepreneurs who are involved. And I have to say, I miss Tanchidot. Tanchidot was not here. They were a very strong presence at the first one. I did see the Tanchidot guys at South by Southwest Interactive, which is an event that's always in my circuit. I'm always there. And they had come over during the earthquake. During the tsunami. They were booked to leave, and there were a bunch of Japanese entrepreneurs with them, people in the smartphone space, and they'd been presented with this sort of last-minute decision. Should we fly to Texas, or should we stay in what may be a very serious situation? And they thought, we must be brave. Let's go out and do this event. And they showed up in Texas, and their country had just been absolutely torn to shreds. And and all during this day, the news was pouring in, and it just got worse and worse. And I went and I saw Tanchidot, Tanchidot people. I went to their warm-up party. There are not a lot of AR people at South by Southwest, but they were there. They had a product launch to do. They were devastated by what was going on. There were tears in their eyes over what was going on. But they immediately started organizing. They put up a charity. They were they just took matters into their own hands. They were hitting people up for contributions. They were spreading news about what was going on. And these are really eccentric guys at Tanchidot. I don't know if you spend a lot of time in Japan. I used to. Guys at Tanchidot, these guys are stone geeks. They're really strange guys. But they had guts. They were really capable. They took matters into their own hands. They did not panic. They took constructive activity immediately. They're not here, but my respect for them is soared. They are really a together group of people.
An interesting question in my mind, and that is a lot of the things that I write about, and a lot of the things that I see happening technologically get us into a position that it's not clear what would happen if we had disasters of this magnitude. And I think, as with the internet, or the original concept of the internet, that it is possible to make situations where the technology actually makes things much safer. On the other hand, it's very easy to imagine. In fact, Jerome Lanier this morning, he cited this story, The Machine Stops. I recommend that everybody here read that. I had a different take on it than Jerome did, slightly different. The fellow who wrote it really headed in for H.G. Wells.
He did.
And the story is anti-technology, but not, in my mind, not in the sense of saying, rustic primitiveness is preferable, but just in terms of saying, this is awfully dangerous. And The Machine Stops right now, it's more eerily prophetic than, well, right now or in the next 5 years, it's more eerily prophetic than it's ever been before, because it's more or less a perfect story of what would happen if the Internet of Things stopped. And I think that's one thing that going forward, when you think about all the stuff you're doing, think about what it would happen under certain massive failure scenarios. Given the amount of independent processing that you have, if you have electricity, there's a lot of things that you can do. But if you're depending on other things, for instance, automobiles that have computers in them, you may be dead very, very quickly. So I think there's some real things to think about as we go forward, because frankly, I think the Internet of Things is on unstoppable rails. It is coming. And the thing to do is to figure out how to do it to make it as safe as possible.
You know, I'm quite the Internet of Things enthusiast myself. But I'm also a massive disaster enthusiast, because I think all science fiction writers are. You know, there are very few people in our society who actually get paid to like contemplate the worst. But we do, and we do it dramatically. And it's what Brian Aldiss sometimes called the cozy catastrophe. There's a kind of science fiction writing in which really awful things are happening, but if you study what's going on, the hero's having really a pretty good time. He's got a free car, you know, a nice suite at the Savoy and so forth. But it helps to look at things in that way, because you know, it's not really in the business model. Nobody who like gets an MBA will be told, why don't you think about the absolute collapse of your business? Why don't you think about, you know, the basically tragic nature of the human condition, and it is tragic. Now, you know, I saw Blaise Aguirre's presentation, which I thought was one of the most exciting things that happened here. You know, and he made this comparison between what he called strong AR and weak AR. And strong AR for him is a sort of centimeter scale accuracy that comes with this, you know, a visual kind of not parametric, but you know, just a visual geometry that establishes exactly where you are, as opposed to what he called the weak AR of compasses and GPS signals, which don't really tell you where you are, and you know, I have a very low range of accuracy. But just imagine you were in that tsunami, and you like walked out after everything had washed away. At that point, strong visual AR becomes weak AR, because everything's been destroyed. I mean, the skylines, all the things that you took pictures of, the enormous heap of flicker sets. All you've got left is the compass, and at that point, the compass is like an awesome survival mechanism. So, you know, the unknown unknowns may be stronger than the things we have, and, you know, the race is not always to the swift, and the strongest technology may be, in fact, a brittle technology, and to rely on any one and design is like, hey, pants and suspenders are good.
Yes. I noticed there was kind of in all but actually 2 or 3 of the presentations that I saw, there was an emphasis on successful operations in unprepped environments. In some cases, I definitely applaud this, because it's sort of like having an off-road vehicle that can work even in the absence of gasoline. That is great. In some cases, the unprepped success depended on a cloud that had all sorts of data that had been previously gathered, which would be in a problem if the horizon has been mutilated. But I think that there's also a point in thinking about what seriously prepped environments are going to be like, because that is where I think we are headed. Despite what I said about disasters, I think that's where we are headed. And getting 1 centimeter resolution in those environments is actually very easy. When you have many, many, many embedded processors, they can use distributed time of flight computations to figure out their relative XYZ position with regard to each other, and therefore with regard to your gear. And at that point, you have uniform solutions to all these problems that are maybe 1,000 times harder to do in an unprepped environment. So I used to think that unprepped environments were that was my gold standard, that something would work in an unprepped environment. But frankly, the biological environments are heavily prepped. Animals And plants depend on all sorts of signals in their environment, and it's not too much to think that machines ought to be the same way. So I think there really are some fantastic, very cheap wins as we begin to see the embedded networked processors come in, and as they begin to use localization facilities, which should be implicit with their existence.
You know, I've been thinking along the same way. We've got maybe 5 minutes, and we promise we're not going to keep you. We don't want to be stampeded on your way to the beer. But, you know, I think one of the difficulties with imagining AR and what it can do is that it does come from science fiction ideas, and science fiction ideas have protagonists. They're very human-centered. It's very difficult to write a story about, say, an embedded chip and make it the hero. So, you know, people think of, you know, when you go back and read about early augmented reality, it's always some guy using augmented reality. But, you know, the real action and most of the, you know, power and communication may in fact be machine-to-machine AR. And it may be these, you know, very small sensors. And it may be that, you know, these devices that you have, most points of interest, for instance, which are loaded onto your machine will never be seen by human beings. You know, that it's like on the internet, 90% of the traffic is spam, and 99% of the traffic, even that which is received by humans, receives no human response at all. And yet there's a machine ecosystem which is trading just this oceans of spammy data that we don't want and can't get rid of. But, you know, the idea of a genuinely machine-to-machine AR is intriguing to me.
Right.
Because, you know, machines don't have reality. But there isn't any reason why they couldn't use points of interest, pop-up tags, leave messages for one another. You're going to have mobile machines moving around, Roombas and so forth. Automobiles could trade AR stuff with one another. It's like your automobile could be like, every time it stops at a stoplight, it could leave like a scent trail like a dog on a lamppost. You know, I was a car, I was here, you wouldn't volunteer to do that yourself, but maybe somebody would pay you to do it. That's just, you know, a world that was previously unexplored because there's something not very pulp sci-fi hero about it.
I think that most of the AR that I think about and that I see is about enhancing human cooperation and direct human productivity. But I actually spent a lot of time thinking about something that is related to what you just said, Bruce, and that is really the tools that we have here and that you have described, that they enable getting results without having to think about the task. And in a way, the more of that we can do that really does not deserve to be thought about, in a way the better, because then we can concentrate on human-human interaction and on doing things that are grander. So in a way, many of the remote applications that are using AR to help repair people and assembly people and stuff like that, to the extent that they don't involve having a remote human doing the advising, it really made me think unhappy things about what it is to be a human. Because in many of those scenarios, and they were admittedly very simple scenarios, but they illustrate what's going to happen to simple scenarios. In many of them, the human's chief contribution was that it was a better manipulation device than currently existing robots. And that actually is going to change relatively soon. So that means that none of those applications are dated by themselves, but the tasks that we really end up spending the humans on are going to be significantly more complex and will probably involve consultative functions with people who are at remote sites.
You know, I'm a writer and I hang out with engineers and technologists a lot. My dad was an engineer, so I kind of knew what that looked like. And you know, they are people who differ in temperament, and the difference is that writers are melancholics. They really are kind of more quiet. They're not exactly introverted.
You can tell how quiet here.
Well, now they like an audience, but you know, they're not exactly introverted, but they are kind of inside somehow, you know, thoughtful, I guess you would say, or just ponderous in the way that they think, as compared to inventors or you know, entrepreneurs, designers, engineers, or technologists. And one of the things that we have that I don't think many people in lines of work do have is the difficulty we have when things stop being science fiction. You know, And as I grow older, more of the things that I have written about become not just predictions, but like retro-dictions. I mean, the things I predicted that happened and then became old-fashioned. I'm trying to like find ways to be at peace with this. I think it's something. There's something. It's like sending an adult child out of the house, really. When an idea that you have, which is science fictional, actually takes on legs and moves into the real world. And you have to understand that this idea, even if you had it, is not necessarily the most beautiful idea in the world. Even a predictive success, which is, gratifying, because frankly we just make up a lot of stuff and most of our ideas are pretty haywire. Even when you have a genuinely foresightful idea and it walks out into the world, you have to have a way to let it be an adult, to like make its own way. And we don't have, as far as I know, any kind of tribal ritual for this. We have lots of events as science fiction writers. We have award shows, the World Science Fiction Convention. I've never known people to get together and sort of say, this idea is no longer science fiction. And we should just, Brian Aldiss says you could write science fiction about anything. There's a vogue now for writing science fiction about old-fashioned technology, steampunk writing, and so forth. I've done some of that. But how do we, if I had a fairy wand where I could just sort of reach out with a star and sort of like bang it on your heads and say, go forth, you are no longer science fiction, I would do that for you. And I would urge you to take it to heart. Be prepared to grow up. You won't be sheltered in fantasy, no matter how ingenious it once was.
It's 5 o'clock.
We've got to go. Thank you.